Hi, I'm Nick Hague, and I'm the host of the World's Greatest Business Thinkers podcast. And today I'm with Paul talking about pricing frameworks. I've heard it said that out of the 4 Ps, price is the only one that brings money into an organisation. The other 4 Ps incur costs. I've also heard it said that we in business spend more time thinking about P, the product, the place P, and the promotion P, and much less time thinking about price. What's your thoughts on this, Paul?
Well, I agree with you, Nick. Of course, I think it's understandable that we perhaps don't spend that much time thinking about price, because once a price for a product is established, we don't mess with it we can't mess with it that often, because you couldn't, for example, set the price of a product and then double it without having some really serious reaction on what it's going to do to sales. So once you've set your price, you tend to leave it and then perhaps increase it with inflation. So you'll make your price increases each year, that sort of thing. So, but we ought to just step back a minute and think, well, how are those prices set in the first place? You know, if they're going to stay the same for a long time, we hope we've got it right. And I think there are 2 ways which historically people set their prices. And the first is a very obvious way, where they say, well, it's cost me so much to make this product and we have to make a profit, so we'll add a profit margin to our costs, and that makes our price. It costs plus pricing. And then the other way, and it's a fairly obvious way and not necessarily a bad way, is to price against the competition. So you're producing a product, the competitors have got products, you can see what prices they're selling them at, and yours has to be competitive. It has to be within the limits of their prices. And so these prices get set historically, and we tend to live with them and not think a great deal about them since then. Now, it is difficult to change a price once it's established. So what we might be talking about in terms of our discussion today and about the frameworks is pricing new products.
Yeah.
And we have to think differently about doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're right. It's one of the most important aspects of launching a new product. You know, if you price it too high, you may not get the sales you need to make the product profitable. Or, you know, on the other hand, if you price it too low, you may sell many units but not make enough profit to sustain the business. And that's why understanding the price elasticity of your product or service is crucial. Why do you think it's so difficult to determine an appropriate price for a product?
What the ideal way of determining a price, say for a new product that you're going to launch, would be if you could do a test market. It would be a perfect way of establishing whether that's got the right price or not. But very few companies ever do a test market or can do one, because in order to do a test market, you've got to have an isolated area where you can say, in this geography, in this region, we're going to launch our product at a specific price. And other areas will be our control area to see which of the areas sells best. Well, you can imagine that if you did that, you get contamination in the region. You know, the competitors would very quickly work out what you were doing, and they could ruin the test. And it's expensive to do. So people do not do test markets. So it's difficult to judge this elasticity of demand, because that's what you're talking about back there, Nick, when you're saying, at what price will we achieve what volume, and what is the optimum for us? What's the optimum price to give us the best volume and the best profit? So understanding the elasticity of demand for our products is difficult.
Yeah.
And we can't do test markets, so we have to find some other way.
And it's not as simple, is it, as just, you know, matching against your competitors' prices for accurate, because, well, you don't know their overheads. You could be offering a different quality product than they are anyway. So, you know, you do need to try and search it out yourself. So there's lots of pricing frameworks on B2B Frameworks, the website. What's your recommendation for a good starting point?
Well, a good starting point is to try and figure out the elasticity of demand. You know, the elasticity of your prices. And you might be able to do that judgmentally. I mean, there are certain types of products where, you know, they're highly elastic in terms of the demand. So luxury products, for example, if somebody reduced the price of a luxury product by a significant amount, the sales would increase considerably. airline seats. We know that Ryanair have proved this, that if you sell an airline seat for $15 or £15, loads of people will jump on that offer, and you'll sell lots of airline seats. And it's very different in business to business markets, where if you're selling a product or a service which is used by some other company which is making a product and a service, then there's a limit to what they want to buy. If you reduce your prices, are great. If you're making nuts and bolts, there are only so many nuts and bolts a manufacturer needs to buy if they're using those nuts and bolts. So you reduce the price and they still buy the same number of nuts and bolts. Now, over time, you might win market share from a competitor because your prices have become lower, but you might not, because the buyer of the nuts and bolts might be buying on more than price. They may be saying, well, the security of supply or the quality of your nuts and bolts is so much superior and I didn't risk it from buying these alternative suppliers. So I think understanding the elasticity of demand for your product is the starting point.
Yeah.
So then we say to ourselves, well, what frameworks can help us understand that? Well, there are two frameworks that you and I have used and they're featured on our website. The first is Gabor Granger. So Gabor Granger were economists, and they said, well, there's a very simple way that you can determine the elasticity of demand for your product and get the optimum price. So what is that? Well, actually, their way of doing it was to ask randomly different prices for a product to a huge group of people and say, how likely would you be to buy this product at that particular price? Now, you would need a lot of people to be interviewed to get a lot of different price points to do that. So what the research world did and what we did, we started asking the one respondent, say, how likely would you be to buy this product at this price? And it was a high price. And then we kept dropping the price, keep asking the same question, how likely would you to be buy at this price and this price, until finally the guy said, I'd buy at that price. Now, you would think there's a huge amount of bias in the way that we're asking that, because it's not going to take the respondent long to figure out that I'm going to hold out here and see how low they go on price before I say yes. But we found that the Gabor Granger tool, using reducing the prices to find out where people would buy how many people will buy the product, will give you a pretty good demand curve. Yeah. And then there's another framework, again by an economist called Van Westendorp, a Dutch guy, and he figured out 4 questions. The questions were very simple questions, rather in the same way as Gabor Granger. He'd say, at what price do you think this product is too expensive? At what price do you think this product is too cheap? What do you think is the optimum price for this? And you could plot curves against those answers. And where the curves met in the middle was like the golden spot as to what you could say the optimum price would be. And once more, as with Gabor Granger, we found that that was a very, very good indication for what the new price of a product should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've talked about Van Westendorp model in another of our framework videos, and I can't recommend it enough. I've used it in many studies when I was a researcher, and why I love it is you don't need lots of questions. You can include it in surveys where you're also looking to get other information, whether it's to do with the competition, market views, future thoughts on where the market's going, rather than just dedicating a whole survey to just pricing. So I really would recommend people looking at that as a framework, as the question set, in order to more accurately get pricing information for their product or service. What about conjoint analysis? That's another interesting and popular framework we find.
And it's probably one that is better known to people listening to this podcast than Gabor Granger or Van Westendorp. So what is conjoint analysis? Well, when you buy any product or service, you're buying a list of attributes of that. It's a specification of what the product or the service is. And you could probably net that down to 5 or 6 key things that you buy, elements, if you like, or attributes that you're buying for that product and service. And you can put a price on it. And what conjoint does is it mixes up those attributes and shows combinations of them, different combinations of them, against different prices. And it asks people to look at those combinations and say, how likely would you buy this particular product? And they would see 20 or 30 such combinations, giving their view on whether they'd be likely to buy. And then they put it through specialized software. Sawtooth software is the normal one that's used here, which would then tell you what the value is attributed to each of those different parts of the specification and the optimum price of the product. So it's not only very good for telling you the price of the product, but it's also very good for telling you what elements of the product or service they value.
Yeah.
So it's a great tool. Now, there is a bit of a downside with Conjoint, and that is that you can only use Conjoint if you get at least 100, and 100 interviews isn't really enough. You really could do with a couple of 100 interviews. And in some markets and industries, particularly B2B industries, it might be difficult to get 100 people to be able to do that sort of interviewing. I also should say that I think Conjoint works okay, but when I've gone through as a sort of a sampler doing it myself, I do get confused. You know, by the time you've seen the 25th combination of different elements and asked if you want to buy it or not, you're punch drunk, you know, and you might almost say anything. So I quite like Gabor Granger or Van Westendorp for their simplicity. But Conjoint is a sophisticated tool. It's very much used in consumer markets for judging the price of products there.
Yeah, and as will be clear, you know, there's lots of different frameworks we can use. I mean, you've talked about looking at price and attributing it to a whole package and what attributes, you know, give value within that whole package. And there's another framework model called Semalto, isn't there? Again, similarly, you know, it looks at, enables marketeers to look at, you know, the whole package and different attributes and the value and price attributed to those. Semalto stands for simultaneous multi-attribute level trade-off. You don't need to know that. But it can be used on smaller samples as well, can't it? Rather than, you know, the conjoint analysis.
It can, because people are shown a grid where they have all the different attributes, the elements of what they're buying against, and it's described, you know, how this is what you get if you get delivery quickly. You get it tomorrow, or you might get it in 2 days or 3 days or 5 days. So people can see those different attributes at different levels. So simulated multi-attribute levels, and they can choose. So you could, in theory, do one interview with somebody and say, have a look at these, have a look at the different levels, how likely would you buy at those, and how much would you pay?
Yeah, yeah. So price is a very specific subject, as we've been discussing. How do we then link price to value?
Well, a framework you and I know very much like is the value equivalence line. So the value equivalence line has got two axes. On the y-axis, you've got perceived price. So you would ask somebody, how much do you think this costs? And they would say, I think it costs so much. And on the x-axis, you've got perceived benefits. Now, in theory, there should be a value equivalence line that goes at 45 degrees, cutting those two price and benefit axes. And all the products in the market ought to drop onto that. So if you were thinking of the car market, for example, you would have expensive cars, like Rolls-Royces and Bentleys and Lamborghinis, where the price is very high, the benefits are considered to be very great, so it will be right up there at the top. And as you come down through the different car brands, you might see going from Mercedes and Audi through to Volkswagen and Skoda and different brands, because, you know, people would have a lower perceived price for some of those brands, and they would recognise that they get less benefits. So in a theoretical market, all the companies that are competing should be on that value equivalence line at 45 degrees. In practice, some companies get out of line. Some companies are quite highly priced relative to the benefits that they're offering, in which case they're to the left-hand side of the value equivalence line, and they would be losing market share. And there would be some companies that would be offering great benefits and the perceived price is a bit lower, and they will be to the right-hand side and they will be gaining market share. Now, note that I've used and emphasised the word perceived, because perceived price and perceived benefits are exactly that. You know, when you buy a bottle of wine, you perceive it to be, you haven't tasted the wine yet, but you perceive it to be a good wine because it's got a high price. So you perceive lots of benefits there. And we perceive, because it's made by Lamborghini, that it will have a high price and load benefits. So actually, that perception is really, really important when we're talking about price. We need to not understand our costs and how much profit we're going to add on to it, the cost plus method. We need to see how much people really value the product, even if it's only perceptions.
Yeah. And we're probably in danger of touching on, branding here, which we cover in another video. Yeah. But, I think it's right in understanding this, that it's about value-based. The value-based marketeer, he produces that product or service, they consider the benefits to the customer around that, and then how they can set the price accordingly. And it's about understanding the needs of the customer, ensuring that the product or service fits together with those benefits, and then position it to get that maximum amount of value. But the value equivalence line is excellent, and one that FDs and people really like as well, the CEOs, because they can see where they're positioned in comparison to the competition, and whether they feel there's an opportunity to raise prices or not as well, depending on where they sit on that value equivalence line.
And Nick, as marketers, it's our responsibility to sell value. If our job simply were, it sounds as if I'm denigrating salespeople, but if our job was to sell things, we might ask the company for which we work to give us the lowest possible price, because it would make our job as salespeople easier. We would be focusing on price much more. Whereas marketeers, we're going to be focusing on value and saying, how can we capture value and still give great satisfaction to our customers?
Yeah. Yeah. So we lots more frameworks to talk about on pricing on the website, www.b2bframeworks.com, and other videos as well, that are talking about value-based and how you can, position your brand as well in order to maximize the value you can get from your marketplace. So hopefully this video has been useful for all you listeners today. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Nick.